Hi Jane-ites, and welcome back to the What the Austen podcast. This is going to be the final episode of 2024. This is our wrap-up episode that me and Caily do every year. So, wow, this year's gone so fast, but also so much has happened, and I'm excited to do this wrap-up episode. We've kind of been stumbling around trying to fit in a time that we can both sit down and do this. I think for both of us, it's just been such a crazy year. But yeah, I'm excited to go back through all the episodes because I actually forgot myself, like a lot of them that I've done this year, and some amazing guests that I had on earlier in the year that, you know, it just feels like a century ago now. But yeah, so yeah, welcome back, Caily.
Thank you. I am so excited to do this episode. There's so much that's happened this year generally, but especially in the Jane Austen world. I can't wait to talk to you about all the different episodes and attending the Jane Austen Festival together. And I think I said this last wrap up, but I mean it even more in a leveled up way. It was amazing to go back to re-listen to these episodes and see how many experts in the field that you brought in and how they helped the audience connect to Jane Austen in a new way. And I just love seeing how much you're diversifying the podcast and talking about aspects of Jane Austen and the history related to Jane Austen to help all of us see her in a new light. So I just really, really enjoyed listening to these, and you did such a good job.
Thanks. I really appreciate that. But yeah, I feel like this year I've learned so much. Like some of the guests that I've had on, like I noticed this year above all the other years, I've spent the most time quiet, like on a lot of the episodes. Like I feel like I've had more time to just kind of sit back and listen, which I do think is something that's actually the best way to be on a podcast anyway as a host, is to give your guests the space. But I think sometimes, like, I one that comes to mind is the episode I did with Tom Ayling. I was literally sat there because I was like, oh my goodness, I am learning so much from you in this episode. So yeah, that one really stood out. But there's been so many others, or just the formative debates that I've had in some of the episodes is really just once again shifted my mindset. I feel like I've had a stronger opinion this year, and that has definitely come up in some of the feedback. Like I think for some people that's kind of put them off slightly, that they're like, you know, that the podcast doesn't resonate with them as much anymore. But at the same time, I feel like for me to show my arguments and my opinions on the books progress as I just go through life, because if I compare like my thoughts and opinions to when I first started the podcast to now, there's just so much difference, like for multiple reasons. Like obviously I have more life experience, but I've just been doing it now for so long, analyzing the text and speaking to different guests, that I'm kind of at the point now that I'm like, yeah, my, you know, episode 1 is going to look different to episode 65, you know, because there's been such a time space in between those.
Exactly. And we do so much rereading of, you know, sometimes the full novel, but deep dives of sections of the novel. So it makes a lot of sense on the 12th reread or whatever that sometimes our opinions of characters evolve, right? They don't stay in the same place. And I think it's really important and adds value to give your opinion on different characters and to have a lively debate. And so, yeah, I think it's honestly, I think it's added a lot of value, and it's been really hilarious hearing some of your opinions. Like, we'll get into it, but just, you know, Edward's not your favorite. And I find that so interesting and funny to listen to. So I really like when people show up as their authentic selves and with strong opinions. I think it makes the podcast more engaging.
Yeah, I agree. And it's so funny because even those episodes, like I did one episode on Edward where I had one opinion, and then as times progressed I have a different opinion. And sometimes, I swear for both of us, I feel like we're both quite good at playing devil's advocate, in the sense that we are happy to just see things from different perspectives, even if it's not something like an argument that totally resonates with us. It's like, actually, I can see the other side though. And I love doing that. And, you know, that's why I always love doing episodes with you, because I feel like we can kind of look at it from all different angles and be like, well, obviously there's this scenario and we have to consider this. And I think it makes the conversation super rich, and I just love it when I'm on with guests who also are like that, you know, that it's not black and white. They can really get into like the nuance of the text and the characters.
Exactly. And just like you said, I think it's important, even if you don't resonate with a particular opinion, to be able to see a flip side and see why someone else might have a different opinion to you. And I think both of us do that pretty fluidly. And I love when we do the episodes where you'll change my mind on something. I think that's so cool.
Yeah, for sure. I love those too. So, shall we talk through a couple of the episodes that came up? I know you've re-listened to a lot of them because you're not on for all of them. So, the ones that we didn't do together, and then we could have some reflection on the ones that we have done together, which, as every year, have been super popular. So, thank you to everyone who's left comments and support for the podcast, and in particular for mine and Caily's episodes, which I know everybody loves. So, yeah, where do you want to start back at the beginning?
Let's do it. Yeah. Well, the first one the first one was episode 55. That was the unpopular opinions. But so do we want to start with the next one, or?
Yeah, we'll start with the next one. I guess we could cover all of ours in one go.
Okay. So then it would be episode 56. It was the episode with author Jessica Bull. What a lovely episode. You can just tell she's a fantastic writer just by the way that she speaks. I felt so inspired to hear her writing process, and how she talked about how you have to be true to yourself and your writing, and the right person to represent you will find you. I was listening to this episode, and I'm like, all right, drop everything, start your writing process now.
Yeah.
So I just found her so interesting to listen to. And I loved how she did a deep dive on Jane's letters and incorporated Jane's family history, her brother George, and she honored all of the facts that she knew about Jane Austen and Jane Austen's life. But as she mentioned, a lot of Jane Austen's letters were destroyed, right? Because Cassandra burned them. And so she also was able to like engage in creative license. And she talked about that really interesting balance. So absolutely loved listening to her process.
Yeah, me too. And something that I really wanted to capture in Jessica's episode, which I mean she did beautifully. The year prior, I actually had a lot of people speak to me that they really like to know more about the actual process that authors have to go to actually get published. Because I know there's a lot of people in the community who are writers and are actually trying to like develop on their writing journey and potentially get published themselves. And I was like, I don't know anything about that. I'm not published. So I'm like, let's ask the authors, people who've actually got published and it's their first, so it's their debut novel, or like for some others where they've released multiple, but I think especially for debut authors, like this was Jessica's first book, I believe. And yeah, I just thought it was lovely to hear about her actual experience, and the fact that she took the time to talk through that actually wasn't easy. It wasn't just I sent this out to somebody, they picked up my book and it's like, yay, published, sorted. That it was trial and tribulations. Like she had to keep sending it out to people, and it took somebody going like, I believe in you, I think this is a great piece, let's run with it. And yeah, and honestly, amazing choice. I'm so glad someone did that, because Jessica is an incredible author and just an incredible person as well. Like she is so enrooted in the Jane Austen community. Like if you follow her on Instagram, you'll see she's constantly at like events, she's constantly doing like tours in relation to the book, and you know are they called signings? Yeah, she's like goes to signings and stuff. And yeah, so she's like very active and very involved in the community, which I love as well, because I think that's so important, because we are a big community, but we also are a tight community. And so I think there is something about, if you are an author, somebody who is using Jane Austen as inspiration, is to really be community led in the way that you're like going to in the way that you are promoting your book. So yeah, and amazing news. Like, this is going to be like a series for Jessica as well. She's already contacted me about like the fact that her next book's coming out, and about me reading the proof of it. So yeah, I'm super chuffed for her. She really deserves all the success that she's had with Miss Austen Investigates.
Absolutely. And I just want to validate what you said earlier. I also connected to her humanness in the writing process. It takes a lot of grit and perseverance and vulnerability to put your art out there. And it's not, it's not always that immediate gratification of getting it published. And yeah, she really very clearly stayed true to herself in this process and was very open about sharing it. And I found it very inspirational.
Yeah, me too. And I also want to shout out her husband. I don't know what his name is, but he is so supportive. Like, he gets dressed up for the Jane Austen events, like as the Jane Austen Festival. Like, he is dressed ready.
Yeah.
And I just love that. And he just seems to be just like right there beside her this whole way. And I just love that, just to see how much he's been supporting her in this process as well, because I feel like you need that too. It's not easy to go on these journeys on your own, because there will be setbacks. There are going to be times when you're like, oh my gosh, am I even doing the right thing here? But to have somebody there by your side who's like, cheering you on, supporting you, a bit like you for me, Caily, like always cheering me on, like, it does make a massive difference. So yeah, I just wanted to give him a shout out as well. Love to see it.
Heck yeah. Jessica's husband, a man in Regency attire. Come on. Like, we love that. I'm so glad she has him as a support system. And yeah, you've supported me so much too. Like, you need people in your community who prop you up. So yeah, really happy for Jessica. And I'm so glad that she was able to be a guest on your pod.
Yeah, me too. So next episode you want to discuss after that one? I'm relying on you to be like, where? And then I'm like, oh yes, remember that one.
For sure. So I have next episode 57, George Castillas.
Oh, Georgie, oh my goodness. I loved doing that episode so much. I had Georgie on my radar for so long as well. And I think it was just finding the right time for both of us, where he felt like he'd progressed enough in his creation of Emma. And I had like the availability as well. But I just loved that episode because I felt like it just brought a different perspective on what it is to make an Austen inspired piece of work, like a graphic novel. Like, I've never spoken to anybody who's created a graphic novel, and I've never heard of a Jane Austen graphic novel either. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, because I loved making that episode.
This episode was so interesting to listen to. I just wanted to start off saying I really enjoyed hearing. I'm so glad you always ask the question of how Jane Austen came into everyone's life, and I love his story about how his mom gave him a copy of Sense and Sensibility and said, "I really think that you would resonate with this character." And I went, "Oh, is it Marianne? She is such a vibe." And I really appreciated his vulnerability, sharing his childhood experiences and how Jane was just such a source of light in that time. So I was just so locked in listening to how Jane Austen was such an important piece of his life. And then I love that Emma was the choice, and that Emma's his favorite for graphic novels. It was really interesting to hear the difference between cartoons and graphic novels. And I really love how he validated how important it is that Jane Austen book and film adaptations cater to the generation that they're from. And so I remember I was connecting to what he said about graphic novels from being a teacher. A lot of kids, their gateway into the reading world is graphic novels, which sometimes, I don't know, certain parents can sometimes view negatively. But no, they're absolutely a valid form of literature. And they're not the only thing you read, but it's absolutely a gateway. And so many of my students were so passionate about reading graphic novels. And so I just love the idea that he said that there wasn't no forms of comics of Jane Austen until 2009. So he's just like, he's really paving an important niche pathway for not only adults but the youth who want to connect with Jane Austen. So I really enjoyed hearing his comments about that, and I enjoyed hearing, oh my gosh, yeah, that's what it was called, about spinsterly ever after, the spinster in her 30s, and her grandmother wondering when she's going to get married. Like, it was just so interesting to hear about his just the graphic novel world and how he's connected Jane to that. I also just loved how he talked about how beautiful Regency dress shows up in cartoons.
I love everything you just said. It was such a powerful episode because I feel like we talked a lot about like the logistics of making a graphic novel, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. And I think it shows Georgie's commitment to the craft itself because of how well he knows the process. Like, you know, he can tell you from start to finish what it takes to create a graphic novel, and he talks about that in the episode. So I thought that was amazing. For anyone listening who also is trying to create a graphic novel, like, I feel like there was so much valuable insights in that episode. But then, like you said, his vulnerability as well, the fact that he spoke about his childhood and even spoke about his experience in the Jane Austen community, which at times was really tough for him, that he experienced a lot of homophobia. And I think it just shows how important it is to keep making sure that Austen stays present and relevant, and that as a community we are welcoming, and we love Austen because her books are timeless and they are about love, and I feel like we need to not forget that. Like, you know what I mean? In Yeah, I was just heartbroken to hear that he had such a terrible experience. I feel like it was just so wonderful to be like, actually, it's great that we're carving out a space in the community that is super inclusive and supportive, and we can all celebrate each other's successes, and we can welcome everyone. So yeah, I thought that was really powerful, but just an incredible person again. And I just want to say that Georgie has finished the graphic novel now. He had a reading with some friends, I believe, that was absolutely amazing. He had like macarons, and it was all like the whole aesthetic for this party that he had was incredible, in true Georgie fashion. But yeah, he's finished. So definitely make sure that you have him on socials so that you can keep up to date with when that comes out, like when you can get hold of a copy.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to get it. That's so exciting for him. I'm so glad he's finished it, and I'll have to get a copy for my goddaughter for sure. And I want to echo what you said. I also very much resonated when, and I appreciated when he named that much of the Jane Austen community, historically, it's been very cis, het, white, and it's so important to diversify that community and have it be a welcoming one, because Jane Austen is so ubiquitous, and she is a genius with human nature, and she's connected so many people to themselves, to each other, and we need to honor that by diversifying our Janeite community.
I
So
think
I'm
the
really
thing
glad they
is as well, like the community is already diverse. It's just whether or not people are being welcomed and like loved and appreciated in the community itself. I think that's important too. It's like the community may even be bigger than we even realize at the moment, and we need to make sure that it is a welcoming space. I feel like this even goes to maybe less serious topics, in the sense that, that there can sometimes be a snobbery around book first people compared to people who came into it via like the film, whether that's like the newer Emma adaptation, or for instance like people who are academics in comparison to people who just love it for the fun of it, the pleasure, they just enjoy Jane Austen. So yeah, I think it's recognizing that the community is wide, it's it's massive, and it's a community for everyone. Like I don't think that we need, like Georgie said, no more gatekeeping. Like Jane Austen's for everyone.
Exactly. And it was amazing to see that too. I know we'll talk about the festival later, but it was amazing to see such a diverse community at the festival.
Agreed. Which episode is next?
So next I have, episode 58 with Shannon. And she talked about costumes amongst the different adaptations. That was so fun to look back at, particularly because we were able to connect with Shannon at the Jane Austen Festival, and she hosted this incredible dinner. We got to know her personally. But what a wealth of knowledge she has about costuming and attire. I was so impressed by all the history she knew. I loved her story as well, that she not only studied this, which absolutely comes across, she just knows so much about the history. I learned so many new vocabulary terms related to fashion. I was like, oh, that's the name of the riding coat that I adore on Lizzie Bennet in the 1995 adaptation. So, and then I also loved that she named that this was a hobby that she really took a deep dive into during COVID. I feel like in 2020, we all needed those connections. And so I really resonated with how she talked about that. Oh my gosh, so many different notes.
Just on that thought, though, I just
oh yeah, go ahead.
just in relation to that, I honestly, something that I love about the community is how passionate people are about their Jane Austen related hobbies. Like, I love it. Like, I love a hobby, and I just love that everybody else in the community is a bit like that. Like, we all, whether it's reading, costuming, if you're interested in history and people are doing deep dives into that, like, I just feel like people are so invested into their area of like Jane Austen that they love, and just like cultivating that and sharing that with the wider community. I just absolutely love it. You're so right. Like, Shannon, like, this is the thing, this is a hobby, she does this in her free time, and she has such a wealth of knowledge, and she is so good at it. Like, all of the outfits that we saw in Caily at the festival, she makes herself, and she does all different eras. So I just think she's such an impressive woman.
She's so passionate and knowledgeable and funny. And, first time around, I listened on Spotify, and she was totally like, it was such an engaging episode. And it was fun to go back and see visually on YouTube that she showed up in one of the Regency dresses. Like, she just is so passionate. And it's so amazing. She makes all of her own stuff. I loved that she talked about how the 2020 Emma adaptation was the most accurate. That I think I remember on the episode, you mentioned that some of those outfits seemed new or seemed different, and she was like, no, this was actually the most accurate portrayal of some of the attire, which I would not have known, because I think previous adaptations that I had seen were not that spot on.
Yeah, even down to the fact that they were copying actual dresses from the time period, which I was just like, wow, this is like incredible. And I do think that episode did lend itself to the visual, like the fact that when I put it on YouTube, I was able to add images of the dresses we were referring to. So I think it really did lend itself to YouTube. So if anyone does listen on Spotify, you may want to go back and watch that one on the YouTube channel. But yeah, fascinating. I never would have known that, because I was thinking, wow, this seems very just very extra, very flamboyant and vibrant. And it was just so interesting to hear Shannon say that actually that was so accurate to Regency England. And since I've like had my own dress made and kind of looked into it more, it's so true. Like, so many colors, like things are so flamboyant, things are so unique as well, which I think we'll probably get into about the festival too. It's like no one dress kind of looks the same, even if they have a similar silhouette. Like, they're so different. Yeah, it's just, I understand now why people like obsess over Regency fashion, because it's absolutely fascinating.
Absolutely. And it was so interesting to hear her talk about earlier Regency dresses versus later Regency dresses. Like, she mentions in the Felicity Jones Carey Mulligan version of Northanger Abbey, which is such a great adaptation, she talks about how Isabella is wearing a dress that's more reflective of earlier Regency, which is sexier. And then Felicity Jones's dress is completely different from later Regency, and it's a little bit more conservative. It was just amazing I didn't know that the difference, that there was such a difference between early and late Regency. And and also I knew, but I didn't know to the extent the difference between needing to cover up more around the neckline during the day versus evening wear. And that was really cool to see examples of that, and particularly how the Emma 2020 accurately reflects what was propitious for early Regency and daytime wear versus late Regency.
Yeah, I loved that we dived into the history of it as well, like why the fashion became so unique, like became so specific for the time. Because the Regency era is like such a bizarre time period in which it's just like has its entirely its own culture. Like it's so specific. Like you don't really see that across any other time period, that it's just so specific, like everything about it is so specific to this very very short era. And yeah, I just loved looking at the history about like Napoleon and Josephine, and like the impact that they had on the whole of like Regency. And it was really interesting because I went to Paris this year as well, and when I was in the Louvre, they have one of the paintings is the one with Napoleon and Josephine. He's like crowning Josephine, and I was just so excited because like all of her ladies in waiting, like they all had these like beautiful empire waistgown dresses on, and I was just there like, let me tell you about this. Like I know what's going on here, like and yeah, and they were all white, like just like Shannon said, you know, Josephine, like, well, Napoleon really loved Josephine in white, and like it was the same for like all of her ladies in waiting, they were all in white as well. And I just think, yeah, it was just, it's incredible, like the knowledge that you can get, like the knowledge that I get at least anyway from my guests, and then I just go out into the world and I'm like, I have so much information, and I understand things better.
Absolutely. I was just about to bring that up. I thought that was such a cool historical fact that he loved seeing Josephine in white. And so it actually had a pretty major impact on utilizing white and on fashion. So so many interesting historical tidbits in this episode. And then also very fun to hear you both talk about like fashion fails in certain adaptations versus when they really knocked it out of the park and got it right. And I was laughing when you were talking about two of the Persuasion adaptations and the fashion fails there. But then also was like nodding so much as I was hearing you talk about the 1995 version of Pride and Prejudice, where Caroline Bingley is in this incredible orange outfit and all of the accessories are on point. And it was very true with Caroline Bingley, with what you talked about with Mary Crawford, that the Mean Girls had, or okay, yeah, those two, the Mean Girls, even though we kind of love Mary Crawford, she's not totally a mean girl, but like the Mean Girls tend to have the more elaborate fashion sense, and how that shows up in the adaptations. And also what she said about how it's really unfair how the older people get so dated with fashion, and how, hey, just because you're older doesn't mean you can't have an up-to-date great fashion sense. So yeah, that was all just so interesting to listen to.
I think what's so interesting, yeah, learning about the fashion as well, and picking out these points in it just pushed for me, it highlighted more the notion that yes, adaptations taken from the books, and yes, Jane Austen's books were set in Regency, which is the time period she herself lived in. From the grand scheme of things, like when you have adaptations nowadays of like Regency, it's like watching fantasy, because we're never going to be able to like fully replicate, like, you know, the 2020 Emma was the most like fashion wise like historically accurate in things, but there's so many ways in which it wasn't. And I feel like this is what always cracks me up when people have that whole like it's not historically accurate debate, because I'm literally just like, I'm not being funny, but it's like an adaptation on telly or like a film, like it's essentially fantasy in some sense. So like I'm just like, no.
Exactly. And just like Georgie said, you have to connect with the generation of the adaptation. And that's what makes Jane Austen timeless.
We've said in the past about how you can have like the essence of Jane Austen and it doesn't necessarily matter what that film then looks like. Like if we think about Clueless, I think that's an incredible Austen adaptation, but from all intents and purposes, you wouldn't know that it's an Austen adaptation because it's not set in Regency and what have you. But Jane Austen's characters are just so incredible and so recognizable that you can place them in any time period, and you can, you can kind of, I don't know, I feel like she has moldable characters in which you can place in different scenarios, and you can do these spin-offs, and I think that's why so many people do. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think we've talked about this before, but for living such a short life in terms of years and having such a limited social community, she was a genius at human nature, and all of the characters can remind you of someone you know in your life, and that's timeless.
Yeah, agreed. Shall we move on to the next episode?
Yeah. Okay, so I have... Oh, okay. The next one is Ben Mercer. And he focuses, this was so great because I feel like understandably we've focused the most on the heroines and often their female friendships or their romantic connections, but it was really cool to have an episode where you talked about the bromance between Darcy and Bingley, and it was interesting to hear you both speak on the male relationships in Jane Austen. So this was another incredible episode. I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, something that I loved about getting Ben on, and why I was super passionate about having him on the podcast is I wanted to kind of bust the misconception that like Jane Austen is not for kind of men who are like in their like 30s and their 20s, you know what I mean? That it's only for either like women or older men, like men in their like 50s, 60s. So yeah, I thought it was great to have Ben on just to show that how timeless Jane Austen is and how she can be read by basically anyone and like enjoyed by anyone. So yeah, I loved doing this episode. I took so much from it, and it was just so easy to have this conversation with Ben. Like I liked it. I think I said to you after to like chatting to you, in that we could just get into this deep dive in this discussion about it, and looking at the quotes and like looking at the quotes and looking at the scenes and how the characters interact. And yeah, I thought it was a great episode.
It really was. He made such interesting points about Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingley and how they have different forms of intelligence, and how Mr. Bringley, do I know the novels? Mr. Bringley. Mr. Bingley has such a level of extroversion and social intelligence, and how he helps Mr. Darcy as much as Mr. Darcy helps him. And I thought you made an interesting point that because Mr. Bingley is less established than Mr. Darcy, even though he does well, he has to be a little bit more extroverted and make these social connections. So I loved that point you made. Yeah, I really just enjoyed a lot of aspects of your conversation with Ben. I thought one really great point was how you mentioned Jane being true to herself and her own knowledge set, and how she has minimal dialogue between just two males in the novel, and you made the great point of she wouldn't have experienced that, right? Like she wouldn't have seen many examples of that. So just like Ernest Hemingway doesn't often talk about dialogue between two women, Jane Austen minimizes dialogue between two men, yet we still see this really incredible example of a friendship where there's a lot of balance of strengths and flaws.
Yeah, 100%. And in the same sense, Jane Austen not writing these like private conversations between men, I couldn't have done that episode with anyone else. You know what I mean? Ben was perfect for that. And I needed a man's perspective on that too. What is it like to have these male friendships? Is Jane Austen's work even reflective? Because like we could sit here reading it and just be like, oh yeah, this sounds like guys when they're together, this sounds like a bromance. But I just thought it was so good to hear Ben's perspective, and also like the wider conversation that we just had around men in friendship, and how often for some men it's such a struggle, and for other guys, it's like their lifeline, their group is the thing that gives them strength, when they're, especially as they're like growing up. I think like before you find like a partner and everything, and I still think men having friends is so important for their whole life, as I think it's important for women as well. But I thought it was really interesting to hear his perspective, and I thought it was a great episode.
I agree. It was so great to get a male perspective on all of this, and the importance, just like you were just saying, the importance of men being able to confide in each other too. I think I think that's just so important. And some other notes I had on this episode where I really liked how the two of you highlighted Mr. Bingley's character with a little bit more complexity. I think at one point you went, is he a wet lettuce or is there more here? And both of you came to the conclusion that he's not a wet lettuce. There is a lot of nuance that he brings. And I really enjoyed the part where you were both mentioning how even though Mr. Darcy's first proposal is a disaster and misattuned, Mr. Darcy takes a lot of personal agency and takes action, and how Mr. Bingley, even though he has a lot of different strengths, his flaw is that he'll be indecisive and he won't rely on his own opinion. So some of his character development is he grows and he takes action, and he does end up proposing to Jane. So I thought that was fascinating. And then just the last thing I'll say, I know that this episode was more about Darcy and Bingley's bromance, and I thought it was hysterical how you talked about the part about what it would be like if they were on Hinge, and how Darcy's height would give him the edge. Like, there's a lot that was playful here. And I just had to name that it blew my mind when Ben was talking about how Caroline Bingley is a mirror of himself, or a mirror of his worst qualities, and a mirror of his class and kind of the snobbery, and how the fact that he rejects her means that there's a part of him that is open to the larger world, that is rejecting staying in that niche, in that niche part of society. And anyway, I just thought that was such an interesting point, so I wanted to name that too.
Yeah, I agree. And just off on that point of Caroline Bingley, like I did a whole video, not on the podcast, but on my main YouTube channel, about Caroline Bingley and how she has pick-me-itis, how she falls into the characteristics of being a pick-me. Not to point the finger at her, I make the point in the video to say that it's difficult for any woman to go through life and not have at least a time period in which she is a pick-me, because that's just how the system's built, right? And I think it was interesting what Ben said in relation to that Darcy, that she reflects back the worst kind of version of himself. But I think Darcy, like, because being a man in the novel and being in a patriarchal society, like, Darcy does represent the system in so many ways. Like the fact that he goes against what was expected of him by society, marrying Elizabeth instead, I think is that breakaway from this kind of pressure, particularly in Regency England. But I feel like, there's so much in that story that's still really relevant now.
Absolutely. He breaks the mold in a way that we don't expect at the beginning of the novel, because he is snobby in the way that Caroline is at the beginning.
Yeah, agreed. Which one do you want to pick up next?
All right. So next would be, we'll skip ours. So episode 61, Laughing with Lizzie. So it's the episode on, this was one of my favorite topics. It was such an interesting topic. So it was where you talked about the heroes and life lessons from the heroes. So what their biggest strengths are, what they taught you both, and also some of their flaws. And you both just nailed it. I really enjoyed listening to this. Sophie, I know, is so involved in the Jane Austen community. It was great to see her at the festival, and she brings so much knowledge. So I really enjoyed this episode. I love that you said Mr. Knightley. It's important to challenge the person that you love. That's what he teaches us. Edmund it's important to stand up for the people you love. And I loved that you were kind of like, he does, but also then he kind of loses it, getting lost in Mary Crawford. You were so entertaining on that during that part. Tilney, how it can be an asset to get in touch with your feminine side, and that humor goes a long way. Wentworth with constancy, Darcy, where that criticism isn't a bad thing, and that you can evolve as a person through criticism and tough love. Colonel Brandon, that the long game works, and he's willing. Do you like these? I know we only have a certain amount of time. Do you like these?
I'm loving the summaries like this.
Oh my gosh. Ding, ding, ding. Colonel Brandon, also the selflessness that he is willing to give Marianne up, if that's what makes her happy. And I have to be honest that it was so entertaining to me, unless I missed something, that you were just like, we're not learning any life lessons from Edward.
I know. I feel like I'm so opinionated on Edward nowadays. Oh, I know. I can't help myself though. I had such a change of opinion, and I can't. I think I did try maybe a little bit, but yeah, it's so funny as well because some people feel the opposite. They feel passionately about him being a really good hero, like a really good love interest for Eleanor, but I just can't get bored with it anymore. Like I do appreciate those arguments. Like, and I had a whole episode about that, about his strengths. But maybe I just feel so passionately that I want Eleanor to have the best in life, and I just think that isn't Edward for her personally. But that episode was so fun. The great thing about the episodes that I do with Sophie, so that was like the sister episode to the one that I did on the heroines with the year prior. Is it's basically just like the conversations that me and Sophie will have together are just very similar to that. So it's always fun to just like hit record and just kind of share that with everyone. And Sophie, just as a person, she is such a pillar in the community and has been for, gosh, I don't even know how long now. Like I think since she was like 18. Like, she's been doing it for so much longer than me, and she's been such an incredible mentor in many ways, and such a massive support like over the years. And yeah, she's like a lot of the people that I've managed to get on as well, it's been connections that I've made through Sophie. Like she's helped so much with me like getting in touch with people and getting certain guests on the podcast. So yeah, I just want to give her a shout out for like how incredible she's been. And if you're not following Laughing with Lizzie, I mean, why not? I mean, she's literally like the pillar of the community. Like I genuinely but yeah, definitely need to.
And she made your dress, right?
So that was Abby. So that was Sophie's best friend, made my dress as well. But there we go. Like Sophie put me in touch with Abby, who was able to make my dress. And Abby as well is such a lovely person. And Abby's actually the person that helps manage Sophie's social media too. So they kind of work as this team, and they also host balls together. They just do so much. And I love to see it. It's that bond. Like when I'm with them, I'm like, it's very similar to like what we have, Caily, where it's just, you're going through life together, you're just doing it together, in the Jane Austen world. And yeah, it's very similar for those two, and what they're building together. It's awesome.
Yeah, Sophie has so much wisdom and talent, and Abby as well. It was amazing to see them as a team together and see their table at the Jane Austen Festival. And yeah, I love these topics, the life lesson episodes that you do with Sophie. They filled with so much wisdom, and they're also very funny too. So really appreciated this episode. Okay, so episode 62, Tom Ailing, who studies old books. The deep dive on the older books episode was so fascinating. I had so many notes on this one, but I would say one of the most fascinating pieces to this was hearing about the original manuscripts and how for the published works, there's a lack of archived manuscripts. They can't find them, and how he mentioned that once it was published, they didn't think of saving the original, but how the original can tell us so much, how the original can tell us where the writing really flowed naturally from the author versus where parts of the novel that where there were crossouts and the author rewrote. And so I remember thinking, oh, I wish we could see the original manuscripts for Pride and Prejudice and the 6 completed novels. But I thought it was so fascinating and funny that 12 pages of the Watsons are in the Morgan Library in New York, and then the remaining are at Oxford, the remaining 68 pages, and how they paid just under £1 million in 2011 for these 68 pages, and how that's so incredible that you can see the original manuscripts. And I was like, how do we get them back together? I don't care if it's at Oxford or if it's in New York, but like, let's get those pages together, please.
So true. Yeah. I feel like this is just true of all of kind of if we're looking at Austen as an author and in relation to her life as well, we have such little kind of material to go on, like whether that's the fact that the letters were burnt, so we don't have much in relation to like her life and history, or in terms of like her writing style. Like it was so fascinating to hear Tom talk about these manuscripts, in the fact that she used like every single inch of the paper, and she just was like making these notes and edits, and how she would take other pieces of paper to make her edits. She would stick it on top of the bit that she wanted to discard. And so, yeah, I just, it was so fascinating to hear this, because like you said, we don't have much, proof of like her writing process. Like we don't have other examples, we don't have the other novels. We're lucky that we know a few things, like the fact that Pride and Prejudice was meant to be called First Impressions, those kind of things, like these little tidbits that we like throw around in the community. But there was something so incredible about like listening to Tom, and it was not something that I looked into much in any other episode, you know, her writing process, and also actually collecting Austen's works as well. I just thought he brought something so unique to the podcast. It was such an incredible episode. I do want to say, I am so sorry, everyone. The audio quality from my end in that episode was so bad. I was so devastated. Basically, my Wi-Fi cut out that day, and I had to like basically rush to my nan's to record there. But her house is just like all, like her kitchen, anywhere where I had to record, is all just like glass and work surfaces. So the echo was horrific. But yeah, I'm so glad that that was one of the episodes that I literally just sat there in silence most of the time, because there was just so much wealth of knowledge from Tom.
Yeah, I didn't notice the echo at all, by the way. I really didn't. But yes, totally agree that he brings something so unique to the podcast. And I just, a lot of the details he talked about, like that's amazing. Just the process Jane Austen had when she was rewriting something, just like you said, where she would put a piece of paper over and attach it. And the fact that she'd attach it with pins, and the original pins she used are still with the manuscript. I mean, I find all those details absolutely fascinating. And I loved how he talked about too, how it was beneficial and pragmatic to break up each novel into several volumes. I always wondered why the older versions were broken up into different volumes, and it was because there's so much turnaround at the library, and that was a light bulb moment. And I would love to connect with Tom and talk about old books, because my grandfather loved to collect old books, and I was really lucky to inherit this library of old books. I just love to learn more about old books, and so I have just a little shout out to Tom. Here's one of the volumes of Emma, and this is a first edition from my grandfather. And I understand why now, like when I look at the editions, why there are 3 volumes, which I didn't understand before. So anyway, I really, really enjoyed this episode and love old books, and feel like it's so important for people to have knowledge and honestly have activism around preserving these manuscripts and preserving these older books. They're such an important part of history.
And there's something important, I think, that we don't forget, the importance of having this, because something that me and Tom discussed is how nowadays people type out their work, and so we won't have that process necessarily. We won't be able to see those edits made. And I feel like that's going to be such a great loss in the future, that we don't have that. It's like something tangible, isn't it? That you can see the journey that someone's gone on in their creation, their creative process. And I think that's something important that I'm kind of worried that we won't have in the future.
Absolutely. And even someone's penmanship, someone's handwriting, or it can say so much about their character. So I agree that we lose some of that through typing, and just like you said, through not seeing the crossouts and the narrative process. Next episode was episode 63, Bringing Jane Austen's Bath to Life with Ellis. Oh my gosh, that was fantastic to have been in Bath and then be re-listening to this episode where Ellis, who just has such a wealth of historical knowledge, and has spent a lot of time in Bath, orients us to Bath. And I just love how she mentioned specific streets that not only Catherine Morland was on, but how it was near where Jane lived. And she just absolutely orients us to the society of Bath, and how, Catherine has this romantic notion of Bath, and she anticipates it being so wonderful. And then when she's there, remember you both were talking about how the ballrooms are so cramped and it's actually quite hard to break into society. And I really, really appreciated how both of you talked about the master of ceremonies and how there would be someone facilitating social dynamics to make it less awkward, and so that people could meet each other in a propitious way. And I was laughing at some of your comments. I was like, oh my gosh, I think you said you wanted to be the master of ceremonies, and I was thinking, I wish I had a master of ceremonies. I would love someone to facilitate all of my life dynamics. Yeah.
That's so true. I feel like I can credit so much of my knowledge and interest now in the history of Regency England to Elle. Like, she's taught me so much, and I feel like she has such a zest for that kind of knowledge for history that it's so contagious. Like, it makes you want to know more. So yeah, I always love having Elle on the podcast, and it was so wonderful to meet her in person for the first time, because it was wild though. Like, obviously we've met in person prior to the festival, but it was so bizarre because I felt like I knew her so well. It didn't feel like the first time I was meeting her at all. Like, I was like, oh, I see you all the time. Like, I know you so well. It was just, yeah, it was very full circle, I thought, and it was lovely.
That was amazing for the three of us to get together. I agree. Elle just comes with such an enthusiastic energy, and she just has so much knowledge. It was so fun to hear her talk about the Royal Crescent. And we were on the Royal Crescent, and how, depending on where you were in Bath, it was really reflective of status. I think she talked about the Dalrymples and Lansdowne Crescent. I don't know how to pronounce everything, but how that if you were there, that signified status and wealth, versus poor Miss Smith in the Westgate buildings, and how if you were poorer, you tended to live by the river. And it was just amazing how Ellis oriented us to Bath, and gave such great context to the characters in the novels.
Agreed. Totally agree. Do you want to move on to the next one?
Yes. So episode 64 was Caroline Jane Knight. I love that her middle name is Jane, and she's Jane Austen's fifth great niece and the founder of the Jane Austen Literacy Foundation. What an amazing episode where she talks about her family history and life growing up, not only with Jane Austen as a relative, but actually growing up in the Chawton house. And how she mentioned, even at 5 years old, there's such a clear sense of family pride where she said, Jane Austen was a pioneer, and she didn't even know what a pioneer was yet. And just mentioning how, there were so many Jane Austen fans in the 70s and 80s, but how the 1995 miniseries really really launched even more fame in the Jane Austen world, and how that impacted her. She just had such a unique experience to bring, and this episode was so engaging.
Yeah, this is one of the episodes that was really on my heart to make, and I wasn't sure if I was ever going to be able to make it because I wasn't actually sure how I'd get in touch with Caroline, like how I'd get her on the podcast. So as I was saying before, Sophie has been such a massive help in getting me like in contact with people in the community who are a little bit harder to get in touch with. And so yeah, it was. I loved that episode. I thought, again, like I find this with a lot of guests, but she was so authentic and so vulnerable at times. Yeah, talking about her family and her experience growing up in, what's essentially Jane Austen's family. And yeah, I thought it was just fascinating. It was so wonderful. Like I read her biography before she came on, but there was something so beautiful about hearing it from her, like her story, like hearing it aloud. And I hope people listening got to really feel immersed in that episode, and her experiences. And yeah, also I think she was like, I think maybe she'd been on like one other podcast, but it was definitely like one of the few like kind of interview types that she'd done. So I think that's probably going to change next year because it's such a big year in the community. But I kind of feel proud that I managed to pull that out of the bag.
Okay, so the next episode is episode 65. This was with the author Caily Longston, The Trouble with Mrs. Montgomery Hearst. Again, this was so fun to hear an author's perspective. I loved her story with Jane Austen. I was like, oh my gosh, she's living my dream life. The fact that she worked at the Jane Austen Center in Bath and has her master's in creative writing, and she was one of the costumed character guides at the Jane Austen Center where we were for afternoon tea with Mr. Darcy, and that she was Kitty Bennett. Like I just loved hearing all of those details and how she was reading a lot of Jane Austen, because if you had that job, you could be seen reading, but you could only be seen reading Jane Austen's works. This really tickled me. Tickled me, sound like I'm 400 years old. And it was really amazing to hear the amalgamation of authors that inspired her, like that okay, while this was set in a small Victorian town, Jane Austen was a huge influence, and Elizabeth Gaskell, who's another amazing writer. And I just loved how she said that initially she didn't realize how much Jane Austen had inspired her. It was so ingrained that her publisher said, "Oh, is Jane Austen a huge influence here?" And she goes, "Wait," she's like, "Absolutely, she is." And I mean, you can totally see it with all of the names of the characters that she uses, right? Like Felicia Elton, Amelia Hearst. And I love that there's a shout out to Mr. and Mrs. Hearst, because I think Rupert Vanistart in the 1995 version does such a phenomenal portrayal of Mr. Hearst, and I love that that actor shows up in Bridgerton. So anyway, I really liked the names that she uses, the shout out to Austen names, and how both Felicia, and Amelia capture elements of Emma in different ways.
Yeah, it was so fascinating to chat to Katie. And also, what's wonderful about Katie as well is her book's set slightly later than the Regency era, because she takes so much inspiration from like the Victorian and Edwardian periods as well. And so it was great to chat to her, because she has such a knowledge just of all kinds of books, obviously like books set in Regency, but then Victorian books, Edwardian books, which she showcases a lot on her because she has a booktube channel as well. So yeah, it was just great to see, and so impressive as well, you know, that she's a published author. She's got this booktube channel. Like, I just think it's incredible. Like, she's just doing so well for herself, and I think that's amazing. And the lengths that she went to make sure that she was, again, similar to Jessica, just really really appreciating the historical accuracy that she brings to the books in terms of like really nuanced stuff. Like, she went to factories to make sure that she understood the process because there was like a brewery in her book, and so she went to like these breweries, even though she doesn't like beer, to like make sure that it was all like accurate. I thought it was just brilliant because I think a lot of the time, yeah, there is something about taking the time to kind of understand the time period enough that you can have those elements that are really authentic whilst also bringing your own creative flair to it. So
absolutely, immersing yourself in a real way into the time period and absorbing those details. And just two other things that I really resonated with was when she talked about the impact of gossip and how gossip impacts characters and launches the flow of the narrative, and how some of the tone of the gossip reflected Jane Austen's letters, where she was funny but a little bit mean sometimes, a little bit snarky. And I also just wanted to name that I thought the Jane Austen July was a really cool tradition that was really awesome to hear about.
yeah, agreed. And I know that's such an important tradition to a lot of people in the community as well. So it's great to hear her perspective on that as one of like the co-founders of it. So yeah, that was awesome.
So episode 66 was Sense and Self-Sacrifice, which beautiful episode title, with Olivia. And you did a deep dive. I love the character study episodes, a deep dive on Eleanor, who is just such a fascinating character. I really liked and I appreciated your comments on masculine and feminine energy, and how Eleanor, because of her circumstances, really is stepping into her masculine. And she not only does that within the context of her own nuclear family after her father dies, but also within her relationship with Edward. And I think both of you really speak to Eleanor's level of selflessness, the ability to let Edward go, with even if it's with someone she doesn't respect, because she wants him to do what he respects and what he finds is honorable. And I think Olivia said that one of the ways that Eleanor and Edward are really compatible is their sense of loyalty to responsibility and duty. They're really matched in that way. And I just think you both highlighted one of the most important formative parts, where that's painful for Eleanor, where Colonel Brandon tells her about the living he's going to give to Edward, and then Eleanor has to be the one to communicate that. And both of you really talk about how Eleanor internalizes her emotions. She's also the holder of secrets, just like Anne Elliot. Everyone kind of dumps their problems on her. And she really holds so much for the story and keeps so much close to the chest.
I love all of that. It's so true. And I feel like Olivia was the best person to do this kind of deep dive on Eleanor and Cena from this perspective, and from the lens of, you know, what she deals with in relation to kind of like eldest daughter syndrome, and this, like, the fact that she's always in her masculine energy all the time because she has so much to bear for her family, for people around her. And yeah, Olivia, it's Eleanor's her favorite character. And then on top of that, you know, it was actually Olivia who came up with the concept itself, and then I just gave a title to it. But I thought it was such a great topic to cover because she is so selfless, and I feel like Olivia brought a perspective on Eleanor that I'd not seen before, but I thought it was great to look at it in more detail, because I don't think I'd appreciated how much she was bearing, and how tragic that actually is in so many ways, and what an incredible woman, and what an incredible woman she is in the novel as well. Like, I took away so much more appreciation for Eleanor. Like, at this point, I'm like, I think she's my favorite character in the whole book. Like, she's the only person that properly shows up, you know? And it was just great to speak to Olivia as well, because she also has a booktube channel in she's so raw and authentic on her channel, and she has a great following, but she deserves a bigger following. Like, I just wish more people knew about her channel, because yeah, she definitely deserves all the support over there. So if you don't already subscribe to Olivia's Catastrophes, I really recommend it, because she shares so many books that I just wouldn't really know about. And I love that, because I feel like a lot of the time, often on BookTube and BookTok and Bookstagram, I'm not on BookTok, but I'm assuming a lot of the same books are shared, and I feel like it can create like a bit of a stalemate in like the book community, where we're all just reading the same stuff and we're not being exposed to different authors and different texts, whereas I love that Olivia always showcases books that may not be on everybody's radar. So yeah, she's definitely worth a subscribe.
Yeah, and I one final thing I wanted to say about your conversation that I thought was so interesting was just how she how you both talked about Eleanor's balance of being sensible, pragmatic, emotional, but inwardly and a little bit more private, and how some of those characteristics are very similar to Jane Austen. And so how Eleanor and Jane Austen have some overlap. I thought that was really interesting. So fantastic character study episode.
Yeah, I love that one. Okay, last one that didn't involve us is the one that I did with Martha. Yeah, that was like one of the spooky season episodes.
Yeah, episode 68, Martha, the Castle of Wolfenbach. Yeah, so this is such an interesting series that you do, where I know you and Martha have read a lot of the horrid novels from Northanger Abbey that Catherine and Isabella read. And so I know I've listened to your deep dive on Mysteries of Udolpho and The Monk, and it was really interesting to hear the comparison of them with the Castle of Wolfenbach. So I thought it was really interesting how certain characters mirror Catherine and Isabella, and your discussion about, right? Like there's so many, there's so much influence on Catherine and Isabella with some of these prior novels. And then also the title similarity that you picked out between Northanger Abbey, Castle of Wolfenbach, and how your discussion of the location. And how that's very much oriented in Northanger Abbey, right? That it's in England, and then just that it's linked to Austen's world because of where it's based.
Yeah, I love that. And out of all the 3 books that we've read so far, this has been my favorite. You can definitely see how other authors like Jane Austen, and I think maybe like Edith Wharton and Elizabeth Gaskell, probably took inspirations from someone like Eliza Parson, because there's so many similarities. Like, this is essentially a societal novel. It does have the Gothic elements and does fall into the Gothic genre, but compared to the others, it was more society based. It was more character based as well, which I found really interesting. And out of all of them, I found the most similarities to Jane Austen's style and the way that she builds characters, the same way that Eliza Parson does. And I think Eliza Parson in general is like such an underrated author that needs kind of bringing into the limelight a bit more. You know, she was a single mom, like she lost her husband and a lot of her sons, and she was basically supporting her whole family on her own. You know, this is prior to the Regency era as well. Like, you know, she was so impressive. Like, you know, I mean, that is in a very impossible situation to be in, like a single mom raising kids in like the Georgian era is just, it's wild, really wild. And she wrote these books to support her family. In the fact that she was even writing, you know, in her own name as well. You know, there's so much that's so impressive about her, and I really think she needs more credit, because I actually think the book's fantastic. And she actually wrote in her book saying, like, please don't judge me too harshly for my writing, because she obviously just did not see that she was such a good writer. And yeah, I was really glad that we read that one and we could talk about it, because hopefully it encourages other people to read her work as well.
Oh, and her vulnerability with that, not believing in herself, because this book is considered a classic of Gothic fiction, right?
Right, but isn't that so relatable? How often, like as women, do we think like we're not good enough to do stuff? It makes me think about the stat that like most women won't apply for the job unless they meet like 90% of the criteria, but most men will apply on like 60%. I think it's a real struggle. Or when I was at uni, like one of the main comments was that the women in my year at uni, like we didn't have confidence behind our arguments, like in our theses and stuff. Like that's what they said. They said you just don't, you're always contradicting yourselves. And I think it's so interesting that obviously that's still something we all struggle with now, like that sense of imposter syndrome, or that we're not good enough. And yeah, that was still relevant to someone like Eliza Parson back in Georgian England.
Well, this was clearly good enough. Classic of Gothic fiction. And you said that this of the three was the most believable story too, right?
100%. Some the other ones were wild. Like honestly, it
I
felt
know.
like
I
a
was
dream.
what is happening?
Like this one was still like a bit wild, but definitely more believable than the others.
Oh my gosh. Amazing. Well, that is such commitment too, that you would do those deep dives. And I think that's so cool that you go back and read the actual novels that Catherine and Isabella read. Like that just brings so much more interesting context to Northanger Abbey.
Yeah, and I just want to say how much I love Martha as well, that she always does these deep dives with me, because it is a commitment. Like a lot of these books are long. In Martha's such an avid reader anyway, like she gets through so many books every single month. But yeah, the fact that she, cuts out the time and does these reads with me, honestly, like I'm just so grateful for her as a friend. And she had so much on this year. Like she literally did it just before her wedding as well. So amazing.
Wow. Yeah, she brings so much to the podcast. And I know that she's been on the podcast since pretty much the beginning, right? Yeah.
Yep, she's an OG, like you, like Ella. Anne, who doesn't come on the podcast much anymore, but she's still there in the background, like cheering me on. Yeah, there's so many just like people who've been there from the start that I just love and appreciate. So yeah, shall we talk about the festival?
Oh my gosh. Where do we start?
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Yeah, it was honestly such a magical time. I was saying to you before we jumped onto this that I rewatched the vlog that I made about our whole like festival experience. And um it's just such a magical time, and I don't think I'll ever be able to capture. I'm so glad that I filmed it all, because I feel like that was the closest I'll ever get of like capturing what it was like to be there, and just the time that we got to spend together and just experiencing that for the first time together. So yeah, I'm so grateful that I I filmed it, and we basically had like a film of that time, because I also don't think I could have expressed to anybody how much I enjoyed it either.
You captured so many beautiful moments. And I captured a few too. No. But
You
it
did. If you saw me on the screen, that was Caily filming.
it was just I loved that. That was so fun to look back and watch, because it captured not only the beautiful scenery, like it was so gorgeous to see the promenade, to see all of the amazing costumes, and then to see the Royal Crescent, and to see Stourhead, where Mr. Darcy proposes to Elizabeth in the 2005 version. Like there was just so much beautiful scenery, or even to see the shop from Bridgerton and to get our picture, our video in front of that. But then also just other humorous moments, right? When we're trying to uncousin it and we're trying to do our hair for for the promenade, and or my peg leg. Like I just think we captured a lot of really funny moments too.
Yeah, it was just like so magical, the fact that we even got to spend that time together, because obviously I live in the UK, Caily lives in the US. Like it's the far and few between, like the time that we can actually be in person together is so rare. And so I'm so glad we got that opportunity again this year. And yeah, it's just something I'm going to remember forever.
Oh my gosh, me too. And, we spent a lot of hours together on the pod, but what makes me really happy is to think back and go, oh, 95% of the time that we've hung out in person, we've been in Regency attire.
It's so true. And also, like, something that I just want to point out is this is my first year going, and part of that is literally because up until I started the podcast and like joined the community and met people like Caily, like I wouldn't have had anyone to go with. Like that's genuinely the truth. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's something so special about the fact that from the podcast, like I've actually been able to make so many friends. And now, like, we can go to the festival together, go to the festival, invited out to dinner. We know loads of other people there. Like, yeah, it's just something that I am so grateful for. Yeah, it's just when people ask me about the podcast and stuff, I'm like, I think that's the main thing for me. Like, is the friends like in the community that I've been a part of because of it, is the main thing that's like is the most important thing to me. I think that I've got out with this. It's just, yeah, incredible.
Absolutely. Just how passionate everyone is about Jane Austen. And again, like the close friendships you build because there's so much that you share through Jane Austen. And yeah, just thinking back to COVID when we happened to start our accounts at the same time and like what an amazing friendship we've built through that time, how many incredible people we've met who also love Jane Austen. Yeah, my grandfather got me into Jane Austen. He's no longer with us, but I just know he's definitely there in spirit for that weekend and be so proud that I'm still in the Jane Austen world and you are just such a huge part of that. So yeah.
I mean, Caily just sat here, just like
We're
appreciate
gonna start crying.
so glad you're still listening to us. Love letters to each other. So glad I have you in my life. So yeah, I feel like this does every year in the wrap up episodes. We're literally just like, and do about you. Oh, it's so funny. But it was such a fun experience. And like, obviously I have an invested interest of people watching the vlog, but I also just some of the comments that I got on there, like it was such a blessing to see how happy it made other people to see the vlog and to watch it, and how many people have been inspired to go in this coming year and stuff. I was like, you know what, that's what I wanted. Like I wanted to share what an incredible experience it was. And obviously, like I always planned to film it, but I don't think I ever imagined that like the final result or the experience that I had there would be as good as it was. So yeah, I'm just so glad that we filmed it and we were able to share that with everybody, because yeah, just a great experience.
Incredible experience. Just being in Bath itself is already like such a majestical experience, but then just all of the different elements of the festival, like the vendors with all of the bonnets and all of the Jane Austen there's just such talent related to art and fashion connected to Jane Austen. That was so fun to be at. And then you've got afternoon tea with Mr. Darcy at the Jane Austen Center, and you can see some of Jane Austen's original letters. And that was so fun to be at and see all of the characters in costume. And then the promenade, and again, the Royal Crescent. There are just so many aspects of the experience that make Jane Austen come to life.
Yeah, and I hope what it showed as well is you don't necessarily have to do all elements of the festival. Ours was by accident because I didn't manage to get the tickets for a lot of stuff. But you can have that balance, that hybrid of like, you know, just normal experience, like going for meals and having cocktails and just chilling, and also doing the Regency stuff as well. And I also wanted to show that, I mean, the festival itself, full disclaimer, like it was an expensive trip for both of us, really, wasn't it? Like it cost a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. We were lucky we planned it over a year so we could spread the cost out, but yeah, in the grand scheme of things, it's not very cheap. And so I also wanted to show that, you know, you can still have an incredible time and not necessarily do everything, and yeah, in just like different ways, different things to consider. I wanted to put in the vlog as well, like in terms of like parking and just other ways that you can maybe try and reduce the cost of the trip as a whole. But yeah, I do recommend to anybody, if you are a Jane Austen fan, go to the festival. Like it's such an incredible experience.
They even have a camp full of soldiers, like a picnic and everything. Like we did so much, and we didn't even go to any of the balls or anything, and we were still able to have a really incredible time.
I know, we were shattered by the end of it. I was absolutely dead by the end of it. I was like, it took me days to recover. So yeah, absolutely. And actually, on the day that I returned back home from the festival, I got an email from the Independent Podcast Awards that I've been shortlisted for Best Bookish Podcast. So that was super exciting. Yeah, I was so happy. Like I'd actually forgot about it. So like when I got the email, I was like, oh my goodness, that's so exciting.
That is amazing. You deserve that so, so much. How was the award ceremony?
It was amazing. So I just want to say a couple of things about like in general like awards, because I didn't realize this till I started working in events, and I don't think a lot of people realize, but a lot of the time you do have to put yourself forward for them, and then either it goes to a public vote or it's a panel of judges who judge whatever it is that you put forward. So yeah, everyone there had to put their like apply and like nominate themselves basically, and then it went to a panel of judges. So I don't know how many people went for the bookish category, but in terms of how many people got shortlisted, I was against like 8 other people. I didn't win. A different book podcast won. I've left to get the name up. I'll tag the name below. I can't quite remember it at the moment. It was like a desert book one where they, they pick books to read on desert island. But I'll tag them below so that you can always follow them and listen to their podcast. But yeah, it was so lovely. And my nan came with me. And yeah, and also another thing about events like this, award ceremonies, they're actually quite expensive to go to. So I was just really grateful that my nan like bought a ticket as well and came with me, because otherwise I genuinely would have just been going on my own. But we made such a good we made such a good like 2 days of it, and it was nice to go to London with her and things. So yeah, and get dressed up and have some cocktails, and yeah, we had a really good evening.
Well, this is just so amazing. Again, you deserve it so much, and I'm so curious what the setup was like. Like, did they announce your name? Did they give some information about your podcast? Like, did you meet other podcasters? I'm just so curious about the whole night.
Yeah, so like the actual awards thing, because there's so many awards, I had to like go through them quite quickly. So like your podcast kind of like appears on the screen and it's like these are all the shortlisted people. So it's like what the Austen. And yeah, so that was pretty cool. And actually my category was actually quite early on as well. But honestly, that actually going to the awards was so eye-opening to me around the podcasting world in general. It actually made me realize, I think, like I genuinely was so naive and have probably been this whole time. Like obviously I have the support of my guests, I have the support of Caily and things, but in the grand scheme of things, like logistically, like I do run the podcast on my own. In going to that, and actually I'd always assumed that that was the norm for most people, like even if they had co-hosts, like they just did it between the two of them, or if it was one person, like they managed their whole podcast on their own. And going to this awards evening, I actually realized that's really uncommon, that actually a lot of podcasts have much bigger teams than you'd realize. And so I guess something that I wish I knew when I first started, what I wish I think a lot of podcasts were more transparent about, is if they have like teams in the background helping them to like produce, to research, to edit. Yeah, because there was so many people who were like, this is my producer, or like this is this person in the team and stuff. And obviously this was the independent podcast award, so this is like small indie podcasts. So yeah, I was just really surprised to find out that so many people had these teams. And I don't know what my takeaway really is from that. I guess a part of it is like, like my nana said to me, she was like it's really impressive, Izzy, that you've even got to this point, given that you don't have a full team behind you like doing this. And I was like, yeah, then part of me is also a bit like, I wish I'd known at the start like what it takes, like, you know what I mean? Like I just feel like I maybe could have grown, or like I always try and bring good quality to the podcast, like audio and visuals and stuff, but that's hard when you're like doing it on your own and everything. And I'm so lucky that the Patreons, like this year, have been paying towards the podcast and things, because my gosh, like otherwise I was just paying for the podcast like out of my own pocket and things, and it was hard. But luckily the expenses are covered by the Patreons and now. And that book club, the girls in the book club are just incredible. Like I love them to bits. Like we have so many great friends in there, Caily, I'm sure you'll agree. Just a wonderful group of women.
Oh, that book club is so special. Everyone is so smart and sweet, and such a, I wish I could show up like more consistently, but I love that book club. It's such an amazing community. And Izzy, yeah, I definitely have a reaction to what you just said. I think you have put your heart and soul into this podcast. You've given so much passion and time and attention to it. And I think it's just such a testament to the versatility of your skill sets. Like, you not only, can analyze literature, know all of the adaptations, know so much of the history, and are able to like choose amazing topics, but the organizational component, bringing people on, bringing people together, organizing all of the dates, all of those logistical pieces, doing all of your own audio, film, editing, all of it. Your Instagram account, your aesthetic is beautiful. Like, you just have so many unique skills that all come together. And even though I think it would be amazing and help you out to have a team, it's also really cool that you don't need a team, that you are able to do this all on your own. It's just super impressive.
No, I do appreciate that. And I don't want to sound like I'm sat here moaning, like I have to do it all myself. Because I love the whole process of it. I think it's just the time. I feel like what I've struggled with is because I've been so in that process, like doing all of the on the ground stuff, is I think it's limited the time that I've had to kind of do more, I guess what would be considered like business development if I was in like a bigger company, you know what I mean? Like, to do that kind of broader picture, plan out other things. So I think what I found this year, and I think while I started to feel a little bit like disillusioned with the podcast as I've moved into like the more autumn period, is I think I get exhausted by like, I feel like I start out really great and I'm like able to deliver really great content that I'm really proud of, and then I think I just hit like middle of the year and it just slows down. I think I get burnt out from it. So I guess I mean, I need to have a look at what next year is going to look like. I'm hoping to continue the podcast with it being such an important year in the community, but I guess it's just seeing what I can balance in my life next year, as well as like starting my personal YouTube channel again, which again, I mean, obviously I do it to myself. I just put a lot on my plate, but I guess it's just finding what's the best use of my time, and what's the best for my audience, like what people want to see and things like that. So yeah, I guess it's just seeing where the future leads. But I'm really grateful that I had the experience of going to the awards, because I do think it was eye-opening. If I was to, for whatever reason, start again, or if I was to really consider wanting to rampantly like grow this podcast, like I'd realize that I would need like a more of a team behind me to do that, for sure. I mean, not like a massive team, like I need a whole business, but like, I just think like another person potentially who's in the kind of creation side of it, I think is important. And if you're someone who is listening, you are considering starting a podcast, like I think what I wanted to do in sharing this as well is to be transparent, because I wish that I'd heard more podcasters talk about this at the start, that actually a lot of the time they aren't doing it on their own, and that there is a lot that goes into it in the background. And yeah, if you can find people that want to do that kind of more logistical side with you, definitely take them up on it, and yeah, go on that journey together. And even if you don't have that, definitely find a Caily, like someone who's going to be your biggest cheerleader, because yeah, you're going to need that too, because at times it's hard. But yeah, but I'm so grateful for everyone listening, and I'm so grateful that the podcast got picked up. Like, a lot of that is down to the fact that the audience has kept me going, and also how incredible all the guests are. For you, Caily, like, it's a guest podcast at the end of the day. Like, I wouldn't have got picked up if it wasn't for how incredible a lot of the guests are as well.
Oh my gosh, you have done such a phenomenal job. And it is like, I'm glad that you named this piece about what it takes realistically to do a podcast, because doing it by yourself in itself is more than a full-time job. And the fact that you are doing this by yourself and then on top of it have a full-time job, like, that is truly impressive. So I hope you can keep the podcast going, but it does take support, and it takes a team of people. So I hope that people will invest in the podcast, and no matter what happens in the future with the podcast, what you've done with the podcast over the last 4 years, is it 4 or 3? It's 4 years, is tremendous and timeless. And it's amazing that there's such a range of topics and people can always go back and listen over and over again. So thank you for everything that you've done for the Jane Austen community.
Oh, thanks, Caily. I didn't like. I feel like I brought you on just to say this stuff to me. I think this every year. I haven't, but also like part of it as well. Like I feel like part of the thing that's kept me going is I feel like this is so much of like a legacy for a lot of the guests as well. Like people like you, Caily, you've come on. Like I just wanted something that we all have that we can look back on. Like of a journey that we've been on together, like the journey of our friendship. A lot of the time when I capture stuff, whether it is like on the podcast or in vlog format, like I also want it to be something that, you know, we can, like our children can watch and we can be like, look, there's Auntie Caily. We went to the Jane Austen Festival. Do you know what I mean?
With
Like
her peg leg.
with her peg leg. This is when we had one too many cocktails. Like I just think there's something about kind of legacy in it for me as well, where I'm like, I just want these memories like with my friends that I can go back and be like, oh my gosh, like we did that together. What an incredible journey we went on.
Exactly. Yeah, that vlog video that was just amazing to show people afterwards, right? So that they could really get immersed in the experience. And it's the same thing with the podcast and the videos that you've created connected to the podcast too, so that you have the combination of the visual and audio. I think you have a lot of great content that you're right, we'll be able to watch in years' time and look back and remember and smile on and be so grateful that we got that experience together.
It's like that conversation with Tom Ailing, like if you don't collect that creative process along the way, like do you know what I mean, like there's no evidence of it and you miss out on that journey, I suppose. And a lot of time that is important, right? Like I wouldn't, like I'm saying this about, you know, building a podcast and how I kind of looking back probably should have built more of like either done it with somebody else who had a little bit of prior knowledge on like building podcasts or things, or somebody who had like some media experience. But in the grand scheme of things, you know, it's been a wonderful journey, and yeah, I just loved every moment of it. And my gosh, like I've got so many, like you said, like skill sets now that I'm able to utilize in different areas. Like what a blessing. Like it's just been so good. And yeah, I'm just so grateful for everyone who's listened for the past 4 years as well to all these episodes, and your comments and like your support and following on Instagram and everything. Like I just feel like we have such a family now, and I think it's so nice. And I think that's one of the reasons why I just know that like I'm just not gonna want to give it up, which is why I'm saying like maybe I won't be here next year, but part of me is also like I'm just not gonna be able to step away.
Well, no matter what happens, you always have that family and the impact of the podcast. The podcast, it's what's it called? I forget that word. Podcast is memorialized. We got to put it in the archives.
The archives. Oh, it's so funny. It's on the internet, you know, and stuff on the internet never dies, whether that's good or bad. So, oh dear, yeah, but it was so good to reflect on the year with you, Caily. Is there anything else that you want to pick up? Anything else that we've done, that's happened, that you're like, we got to talk about that?
No, I think it was a beautiful year for the podcast. And again, I think you should be so proud of it, and gratitude to the OGs, right? The recurring guests, but then also so many new people with incredible perspectives that help us see Jane Austen in a new way. So very grateful to be part of it. And yeah, just a wonderful year.
Yeah, and next year is the anniversary year, guys. It's the 250th anniversary of Jane Austen's birth. So it's going to be such a big year in the community. So I'm excited for us to experience that together. And I'm sure we're going to have so many more Jane Austen themed things come out in the world. There's going to be so many more people coming into the community. So yeah, I'm excited for 2025.
Can't wait. Yay.
That's everything from us today, and maybe we'll see you in another episode.